What's up, guys? Iceman here. Welcome to Chilling Tales. So basically, there was a bear attack, and it's one of the most troubling ones that I've researched thus far on this channel, just because of the content of it. But before I get into it, I'd like to thank you guys for all your support on this channel, and if you will, like this video, subscribe to the page, and pull that bell so you're notified next time I post a video. And blessings to my patrons. Links in the description below. So this attack happened in upstate New York. Now, there are black bears throughout upstate New York. Like, I'm from Michigan, for example, and there are parts of the state that have them, and there are parts of the state that do not. I remember when I visited the Upper Peninsula, we would go to this little ice cream shop, and there'd be these humongous black bears just hanging out by the dumpsters. These things were like lethargically obese. It was hideous. But they were quite tame. So they had that about them. Deceptively gentle, perhaps. You wouldn't really think that one of these would be capable of such violence, which is why it's important to consider videos like this and the reason I do my research and things of that sort. But nonetheless, upstate New York has a lot of wilderness. It's not like the city, you know what I mean? It's vast wilderness, tons of wildlife, trees and all that. And there was this small community, and this family, the Shoemaker family is what I'm going to call them in this video. They lived in this small little region. Now, this was a Jewish family. They were Orthodox Jew. So they went to the little synagogue in the area, and they were hardworking folks, homesteaders to an extent. Had a couple children. They were in their late 30s when this heinous attack happened. So basically, Mrs. Shoemaker, who would stay at home with the children while her husband would go off to work, she would often go on little walks on her property just with her kids. She had two boys who were like 10 and 11 years old, and then they had this young daughter whose name was Esther, I think is how you say it, right? The biblical name. And Esther was around 1 year old. So basically, one evening, the wife was not far from the house. These houses were spread apart about a couple 100 feet each. And there was a big woods at the end of the yard that would just go off into the vast wilderness. And they would often see animals out in the wilderness, but it wasn't too frequently where they'd see a bear, which is another thing that makes this attack very unusual. But nonetheless, the wife was out with her children, just going on a little stroll down the dirt path in the neighborhood, with the vast forest only about 20 feet away from the trail she was walking on. And her husband was home at the time. He was inside. I think he was helping get dinner ready, and she took the kids on a walk before dinner. So that's when the whole alarm went off, if you will. So the dad was hanging out in the kitchen, and all of a sudden, he heard another man, who was his neighbor, yell, "Bear! Bear! Bear!" And the dad drops what he's doing, and he rushes to the door, looks out the window, and sees his wife running up onto the deck of the house with the two boys. All right, now where was the daughter? I don't know, but at that point, the two boys go running inside the house. So the dad opens up the door. The two boys come running up just past him, and the mom is still there on the deck. And of course, the thoughts on both of their minds, we need to get Esther. So the mom turns around And the bear is there, only about 10 or 20 feet from the deck of the house. And what she sees in that moment is horrifying. Now, this black bear was about 350 50 pounds or so is what they later found. So it wasn't that large of an animal, but it was a Bruin. And the males, to my understanding, are a bit more recognized to deal, or they're a bit more adventurous and, what's the word? They're willing to go out and be a bit more risky with their endeavors. They have more interactions with humans. So that's what this one was up to, it seems. It was being opportunistic. But nonetheless, they turn and they see this bear just standing there, looking in their direction. And little Esther is just dangling out of its mouth like a doll. All right. Now, the child, to my understanding, was quite lifeless at this time, although she was presumably still alive. But her body was just kind of ragdolled. Like, I don't know if the bear chomped down on her neck. Did it break her spine? Did it incapacitate her in some ways? I don't know, but she was still alive, to my understanding, but it sure didn't look like it. So the bear was just standing there with this little girl hanging out of its mouth, just kind of looking awestruck at the people, because the mom and dad then were up on the deck looking down at the bear, and of course they were shocked and horrified. So the bear had this sort of curious but concerned look on its face, right? Like, it wasn't acting aggressively. It's like it just found something, is how it was acting. Like, oh, I just found this treat on the ground and I'm going to pick it up. But of course it ripped her out of the stroller. So there must have been some aggression at play there. The stroller was knocked onto its side and it was standing there with the kid hanging out of its mouth. So the neighbors saw this as well. So you have a couple adults here witnessing this treacherous scene. So what happens is, of course, the dad is just mortified by this. So he just runs after the bear. And instantly, like a dog that's being chased or something, the bear just turns around and runs toward the thicket with Esther still hanging out of its mouth. So it's like it found this little treat that it wasn't supposed to find, and it just takes off toward the woods with it. So the mother then runs into the house. They didn't have any bear deterrent on them, and to my understanding, they didn't have a firearm near anyway, either, because they never used a firearm on this animal. She grabbed some books in a pan from the kitchen, and she went running out the door with the father. The father didn't grab anything. And the neighbors saw this scene taking place. So to my understanding, the guy who initially saw it, who was yelling, "Bear, bear, bear," he conjured up a few other neighbors, and they all went chasing after this bear with the child hanging out of its mouth. And they were throwing things at it, sticks and books and pots and pans. But the problem is, this bear was able to run so fast, so it got way, way ahead of everyone. And it was, of course, terrifying at that point, because what was it doing with the child? For one, it's shaking her around in its mouth as it's running, not really intentionally, but just the momentum and force of its ferocity could have damaged the child even more. So eventually, it drops little Esther in a field. And of course, her mom and dad run up to the corpse of this young girl, this child or baby, whatever you want to call it. She was about a year old. And she was still breathing, but her body was very mangled. There was all sorts of damage and gaping wounds across her neck and her back, and her eyes weren't open. She was just struggling to breathe. There was like bubbles coming out of her nose, and she was bleeding in various places. It must have been just one of the most gruesome, horrifying things that these parents could ever imagine, and they had to witness this with their own eyes. Can you imagine something like that? So, of course, they embrace the body of their young daughter, and the neighbors are trying to chase the bear. Apparently, it climbs up a tree, and no one had a gun, so they all run back and they try to comfort the parents of Esther and see if she's doing okay and all that. So they end up rushing her to a hospital, and unfortunately, the next day, the young girl was pronounced dead. I don't know if it was from asphyxiation or excessive bleeding, but she didn't make it. So what happened was authorities then showed up to the scene, and they went searching for the bear. They found one bear not far from the area in which the folks chased it to, and one of the park rangers shot it. He said that it was acting like it wasn't afraid of humans or something. It didn't seem to run away from him. So he shot it in the chest, and he shot it a couple more times to make sure it was dead, and the thing ended up having 4 bullet wounds in it, and it was shot dead on the scene. So they also found another bear in the area that escaped. They didn't end up catching the damn thing. So nonetheless, they have this one bear that they think was the bear that killed Esther, but they weren't entirely sure. And the reason for the attack, they ended up just doing some speculating, conducting an autopsy or whatever. And it could have been that the baby had scents on it from like the formula it was drinking, or it had a dirty diaper or something like that that attracted the bear. It's kind of inconclusive as to why the bear attacked the baby. It might have just been opportunistic. I don't really know. That's the thing about black bears, is they're very, very opportunistic. They go through garbages, they'll go for your bird feeders, they'll eat roadkill. I mean, they'll just eat anything that doesn't cause them much of an issue to catch or get, which is the concerning factor about them. So it's important to note not to play dead around a black bear, because playing dead around them will just trigger in their minds that this is a great opportunity to have a quick, easy meal. So, and that's a mistake that some people make. In fact, I've made a few videos on this channel about folks playing dead with black bears, and of course, the worst happens, and oftentimes they die, get killed, or lose a body part, or something of that sort. But that's the story of what happened with little Esther in upstate New York in the early 2000s. And it was one of the few bear attacks that resulted in a death in those times within like 10 or 15 years. So, of course, this just shocked the community. They're all terrified, horrified. They asked, God, why would you allow such a thing? But, I mean, nonetheless, those folks persevered. I don't really know if they, what happened with them after that, but it was just devastating to the community. But if you guys will, let me know in the comments, what do you think of that bear attack that took place in upstate New York? What do you think could have been done differently to change the outcome of the situation? I mean, I feel like I would always be walking around with a little hand cannon, a boomstick, maybe some bear spray, especially if I had children. But of course, the thing is, people just get comfortable where they live. They get comfortable in their living situation. So it's kind of burdensome. Like, you already have to grab your kids and get everything that they need, and just, day in, day out, and you don't see bears like ever, generally speaking. So you just kind of get into the mode where it's easy to forget. You know what I mean? Like, I do carry a boomstick often, but not often enough, because I live in a pretty safe community. But that's the thing, is the one time you need it could be the time you didn't bring it out. So that's why, I mean, if I were to live in bear country, I feel like I'd make effort to always have something on me. And I might actually be visiting bear country this week. We're going to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where there are just bears all over the frickin' place. So I'll let you guys know how that is, and I'll probably post a video to our Patreon, so my patrons can see it. just sort of my experience up there. Maybe I'll talk to the camera a little bit, show the bridge, show the forest, show the bears if we see any. But yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace be with you.